Good morning, students. Today we are going to the next part of Unit 3, that is unsupervised learning techniques, under which we have clustering algorithm, principal component analysis. Okay, so first of all, we are supposed to know what is unsupervised learning. Is related with the unlabeled data. Unsupervised learning is a type of machine learning where the algorithm learns from the unlabeled data, where the correlation between the input variable and the output variable will not be present. Unlike the supervised learning, where the model is trained on input-output pairs, unsupervised learning tries to find hidden patterns or intrinsic structures in the input data without any predefined labels or outcomes. So, meaning to say, in a supervised learning, we will have a correlation between the input and output variable, and we have a pairs, whereas in unsupervised learning we don't have that pattern. So unsupervised learning tries to find the hidden patterns or intrinsic structures in the input data without any predefined labels or outcomes. Coming to the key goals of unsupervised learning, there are four different types. One is clustering, another one is dimensionality reduction, anomaly, third one is anomaly detection, fourth one is association rule learning. So in the clustering, grouping similar data points. Okay, so we will see some few chemical engineering examples in for each case of these four categories. So before getting into the chemical engineering examples, we will try to understand the four different goals of unsupervised learning. So the dimensionality reduction, reducing the number of features, that is the variables or the uh, features of that particular compound. Okay, so while preserving the important information. Anomaly detection, identifying the rare events or unusual pattern. So anomaly is always the unusual pattern or is a skew data outliers we used to say, right? So anomaly detection identify the rare events which is happening during the process, okay, and then identify that one, how to segregate that different types of points actually because of the anomaly detection. Okay, anomaly points. Okay, fourth one is association rule learning, discovering the relationship between the variables in large data sets. So one is occurring, the another one is occurring or not, or is likely to occur. So based on that, we will try to see the how the data need to be arranged. And the main techniques of unsupervised learning, the first one is clustering. Clustering algorithms divide a data set into groups, that is a clusters. So we have a different types of clusters. Okay, so we can the data which we obtained, put it in a different clusters, such that the data points in the same group are more similar to each other than to those in the other groups. So for example, I can give an example. In a classroom, the students will have, we will used to have a segregation. Okay, above average, average and below average. So for example, we even for our remedial class, what we do, those who are failed below average, we have been identified and we are putting in a group and we are giving a remedial class, right? So is a clustering. So why we want to make it in that type of cluster? So we can identify and learn the data and their behaviors. Okay. Similarly, we also try to make them to pass actually for the with respect to students. Okay. Hope you understood what I am trying to say. So the common clustering methods, k-mean clustering, divide data into k number of clusters. So the data points, even each data can be divided into different clusters. So obviously the data number of data is equal to number of clusters. So obviously we will try to find how this data which has been behaved so that the clusters will be reduced. So if for example you have 100 data and the almost 30, 40, 30 divided into three parts, it has been behaving in such a way that so we can have a three clusters. Divide data into k number of clusters. Okay, depending on the how this data behaves. Minimize the intra-cluster variance. Okay, and the very good example, the group in chemical samples based on the composition. So if you have a composition or you based on the molecular weight, for example, I say is a molecular weight. So obviously the molecular weight based on the boiling point. Okay, at the boiling point, molecular weight increases, boiling point increases. Right. So if you see this type of composition will help you identify the grouping them into a thing so that we can determine the other parameters. Grouping chemical samples based on the composition. So if the composition is heavier, they put it in different group, and another is a lower, just put it in the different group. Okay, coming to the clustering, hierarchical clustering, build a tree dendrogram of clusters. So the second type is a K-mean clustering. Okay, the second one is a hierarchical clustering, build a tree dendrogram of clusters. So you just see the clusters, cluster 1, cluster 2, cluster 3, how the dendrogram looks like. Okay, so does not need a predefined number of clusters. So hierarchical clustering does not need a predefined number of clusters. Example, hierarchical classification of chemical compounds based on their molecular structure. So molecular weight I told, okay, here the hierarchical classification of chemical compounds based on their molecular structure. So these is an example for hierarchical clustering. So what does it mean actually? The dendrogram or tree-like structure. Okay, starting with each data as its own cluster and matching the closest points, pairs of clusters. Okay, step by step. So repeating this process until all data points form a single cluster. So hope you understood what I'm trying. So from seeing the dendrogram, how the nearest point has been merged and they form it as a single cluster. Okay. So this is a hierarchical clustering, a very good hierarchical clustering, and the dendrogram has been shown here for your clear understanding. And coming to the clustering, we have another one is DB scan, that is a density based spatial clustering of application with noise. Okay, so what is DB scan? D stands for density, B stands for based, S stands for spatial, and C stands for clustering of application with noise. Okay, group together data points that are close in density. Okay, so we are just trying to close the, I mean, whichever is having the same density, we are just grouping it at one point. Okay, good for identifying the clusters of arbitrary shape. So, example, detecting outliers in sensor data from chemical reactors. So, this type of data which has been skewed or outliers, okay, can be identified and then put in a one case. Okay, it's a density based spatial clustering of application with the noise. So the outliers, detecting outliers is a very good important point that need to be considered, which is coming under the clustering point of DB scan. And second part, so first one we have seen the clustering. The second one is dimensional reduction. We will also going to see an example. These four types of methods unsupervised learning. One is clustering, dimensionality reduction, anomaly detection. Okay, and then the association rule learning. Okay, dimensionality reduction, anomaly detection, and association rule learning. For all these four cases, I am going to give an example, minimum two example for with respect to chemical engineering. So before that, I would just like to explain about okay the all these four types. Coming to the after the clustering, we have a dimensionality reduction. We have used to simplify high dimensional data, making it easier to visualize and analyze while preserving the key relationships. So used to simplify the high dimensional data. So dimensionality reduction will help you okay to put it in a sequence manner so that will help you to understand the behavior of the data. Okay, so use the dimensionality reduction basically used in the principal component analysis, projects data projects data into a lower dimensional space using linear combination of features. So example is analyzing the FTIR spectra or NMR spectra data for chemical fingerprinting. Okay, so from the functional group, you could be able to know actually how the I mean FTIR method you can find the functional group and how there's been presence of functional group as well as the vibration, different types of vibration of the functional group, right? So this will help you to understand the thing. Okay, so dimensionality reduction coming under which you have a principal component analysis and then you have a TSNE, T distributed stochastic neighbor embedding, excellent for visualizing high dimensional data. Okay, for 2D or 3D. So in that case, we can go for a TSNE, that is a T distributed stochastic neighbor embedding. Example, visualizing clustering of chemical process performance data. Okay, clustering of chemical process performance data. So when you have a chemical process and if it begins like that, then cluster into that. Visualizing the clustering of chemical process performance data is an example for TSNE. Autoencoders, neural networks that learn to encode and decode the data, used for noise reduction and compression. So the example is reconstructing corrupted process signals. Reconstructing the corrupted process signals. And the third one is anomaly detection, under which we have a three categories: an isolation forest, one class support vector machine, statistical thresholding. Identify the rare items, events, or observations which raise suspicions by differing significantly from the majority of the data. So what you need to try to understand from this all this is that we are having a super unsupervised learning where we don't have a relation between the input and the output. Okay, we are just trying to find it out the data in clustering or identify the patterns how it behaves. Okay, so for which we have a four categories. One is clustering, the another one is anomaly detection. Okay, as well as the what you called the four categories: dimensional reduction and association rule learning. So hope you understood the purpose of what we are doing it, right? So coming to the third part, anomaly detection, we have a isolation forest, one class support vector machine, and statistical thresholding, under which you have a chemical engineering example for anomaly detection is detecting faults or malfunction in a process control system based on the sensor data. So is an example for anomaly detection. Okay, and coming to the association rule mining. Okay, so as I told you, if A happens, B is likely to happen. Okay, for example, is a priori algorithm. That means, okay, so it's a condition. So if the pilot plant identify the rules such as if high pressure occurs, the temperature also tends to increase. Okay, so in that case, what will happen? So what would be the effect on that? Okay, so the algorithm, a priori algorithm generates rules like if A happens, B is likely to happen. So we could be able to understand the behavior, okay, of the data. Used to, I find interesting relationship or association among a large data set of data. Okay, hope you understood all these 4 points. Okay, so application in chemical engineering. So the K clustering, coming under the clustering, principal component analysis, DB scan, and autoencoders. Okay, which is coming under the anomaly detection or what you called the second point. Okay, dimensionality reduction. Okay, is coming under the dimensionality reduction. Okay, where the principal component analysis comes into picture, and the last one is association rule mining. Okay, so in the K-mean clustering, application area is grouping reaction mechanism or catalyst behavior with respect to chemical engineering. Okay, so the catalyst behavior, if it is behaves, okay, we can segregate according to the K-mean clustering. And principal component analysis, anomaly detection, which is coming under the principal component analysis, DB scan, and autoencoders, which is coming under the second category. Okay, so the reduction features from spectroscopy or chromatography. Okay, dimensionality reduction, and then DB scan, fault detection in batch processing, autoencoders, data compression from IoT sensors, and association rule pattern discovery in historical production logs. These are the application of these techniques. Okay, so what we are doing actually in under unsupervised learning, we try to correlate we put it in a data in a which are resembles in nature. Okay, so that it will be easy for you to predict the data input, input and output. Okay, so that's a main objective of the doing so. Okay, so advantages of unsupervised learning: no need for labeled data. So all the data are unlabeled. That means there is no relation between the input and output variables. Useful for exploratory data analysis. Okay, the advantages of unsupervised learning: can uncover hidden structures in complex data sets. So what are the limitations? Or to evaluate results objectively, no ground truth. Okay, results can be sensitive to parameter tuning, may produce misleading patterns without domain knowledge. Okay, so we should understand the behavior of the data. So if you want to segregate the chemical engineering data, I mean, we should have a domain knowledge of chemical engineering. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to predict why this is happening, why this is not happening, how it has been correlated, and so on and so forth. So this is how I just would like to refresh back. Okay, so going back to the previous slide, we are going to see some few examples in the next video. Okay, so I just would like to give a quick overview about today's lecture. So we have unsupervised learning, under which we have four categories. One is clustering, dimensionality reduction, anomaly detection. Okay, dimensionality reduction, anomaly detection. Okay, association rule learning. So we have categorized the data under these four categories. So we have given an example for clustering, okay, grouping chemical samples based on composition, and for what do you call it, dimensionality reduction, analyzing the FTR spectra or NMR data for chemical fingerprinting, and for anomaly detection, detecting faults or malfunction in process control system based on sensor data. And for association rule mining, if high pressure occurs, the temperature tend to increase. These are the examples of chemical engineering under the four categories. One is clustering. The second one is dimensionality reduction, anomaly detection. Third one is anomaly detection, and then the fourth one is association rule mining. So with this, hope you get an idea about what has been covered so far. Okay, so we will continue in the next lecture with the different examples of for each cases, that is for clustering and dimensionality reduction, anomaly detection, okay, as well as the association rule mining. So with this, I just stop it here. We will continue in the next lecture shortly.